no interest was actually owed the banking system, which gave up nothing to create this money. That's our argument, and that's our prevailing argument. Now, do we want to go out there and all wage this argument on our own? Well, if we do that, the same problem is going to occur that happens with all these plagiarists. You remember when we were children, you know, we would sit in a classroom, maybe in a circle on our chairs, and one person would start this off, and they would whisper in the ear of the person to their left, for instance, you know, something. They would say something. And then that person would turn to the person to their left, and they would whisper it in there, and it would come all the way around the circle and back to you, and it would be nothing like what you had originally said if you were this first person. Well, the same thing is happening with all this plagiarism. You can't even find my material on the internet anymore. The one solution that's out there is hidden away, okay? And it's a far worse thing than that when I'm in talks with people in Iceland and the people that I'm speaking with they have no argument that there's an alternate solution for inflation and deflation. Yes, they think that my idea that we should resolve all this debt by reverting it to its actual natural state is rather audacious, but they don't have any argument against it. And then guess what happens? Bill Stills visits Iceland. And do you think that he proposed an alternative solution for inflation or deflation? Absolutely not. Do you think he disproved this idea that interest inevitably terminates a purported economy under insoluble debt? Absolutely not. But Bill Stills visits Iceland, and I never hear from Iceland again. Without explanation. Why? Now, if somebody goes and they try to defend themselves against a foreclosure, and they mispresent these arguments, what's going to happen? One person does this. A precedent is set in the court. And what happens then is the judge hears the beginning of the arguments, which try to say, but by the wrong reasons, that an economy eventually terminates itself, inevitably even, and causes me to default on my mortgage by an obfuscation of my promissory obligation, which multiplies artificial indebtedness upon the world into this terminal failure. Okay? So they present the argument wrong, and what happens? The judge hears the first sentence out of your mouth, holds up his hand, and he says, "Excuse me, that argument has already been disproven." So we can't afford to go out there individually and pretend that we're going to defend ourselves by this argument which we don't understand quite so clearly yet. Because what our failure is going to do is reflect upon the rest of us. Now, how destructive and how false is all this? There's a fellow I discovered recently on YouTube as a result of one day I went scurrying around tracing down another plagiarist and generally write articles which disprove all this, which will go up on our website. And to make all this clear, what is the end game? We're erecting a web presence. I've been adopted as the only solution formally by a number of other monetary reform movements. What we are doing is we're sponsoring a worldwide mandate for mathematically perfected economy and absolute consensual representation. And what this movement does is it allows you to sign this mandate as a sovereign individual, and then even as a sovereign minority to enforce mathematically perfected economy. Now, exactly how we're going to do that is a topic which is, you know, broader than I can cover in a few more minutes here. But nonetheless, I'd like to play at least one thing that I discovered on YouTube just the other day, and this is a fellow who's promoting my work. And against my work, he posted, the actual video of Bill Stills and Ellen Hodgson Brown explaining their purported solutions. And so what I'd like to do is play this through just one time in its completeness, and then go back and play each individual part and expand upon an analysis of it, if you will. So if you'll indulge me just at least this far, I'm going to play this file once through. I'd just like you to listen to it carefully in regard to all the things that we've spoken about so far, and see what you make of this. And then we'll play each individual part and see how all this shakes out. So here we go.
In Ellen Brown's solution, the government would create all the money debt-free. Some of it would be simply spent into the economy, but most of it would be lent into the economy at low interest or no interest to local governments or individuals. In her model, money lent into the economy minimizes the inflationary effect of new money.
The solution to all this is to return to the government-issued money of the American colonists, and particularly the colony of Pennsylvania, which had its own bank and issued government credit. Congress feels that they have to bail out the banking system, and the real reason is that we think that we're dependent on this banking system for our credit, but we're not. Like Dorothy and all the characters in The Wizard of Oz, we have the power to create our own money and our own credit. The government's mentality in general seems to be, we'll do what we have to do and we'll worry about paying for it later. But what you could do is pay for it now. In other words, you don't have to pay for it later. You don't have to pay for it with debt. You can just pay for it with money.
In the Money Master's solution, the government creates all the money in the form of debt-free U.S. notes or their electronic equivalents, and then spends that money into existence through the normal budgetary process. Existing money is, of course, replaced one for one with the new debt-free money. The national debt is paid off with this new money as well, but to prevent inflation, reserve requirements are gradually raised on the commercial banks, requiring them to maintain 100% reserves. In other words, banks could then only loan out money they actually have.
Okay, so very interesting. I imagine you would have some questions about this if you've been following along very well. But anyway, let's go back over the first part of that.
In Ellen Brown's solution, the government would create all the money debt-free. Some of it would be simply spent into the economy, but most of it would be lent into the economy at low interest or no interest to local governments or individuals.
Okay, so did you get that? It isn't a debt. It's going to be spent into circulation. And how exactly do you imagine what he just said could possibly work? Where did you come up with this idea that money somehow cannot be a debt? Well, if in truth, this goes back to this Pennsylvania currency that, suddenly somehow this lawyer who's become an author on monetary reform learned about somehow, and I'd raised it in my work, and you wonder how she discovered it in the course of her work otherwise. And in fact, my account of it is an explanation of an almost mathematically perfected economy from the mouth of Benjamin Franklin in the words of Mike Montagne. So now, evidently, nonetheless, they're using this Pennsylvania currency, and the money isn't a debt, but then again, can it possibly not be a debt? Because if you're going to pay it out of circulation, obviously you couldn't finance your house with this. Let's listen to this just one more time. What is going on here?
In Ellen Brown's solution, the government would create all the money debt-free. Some of it would be simply spent into the economy, but most of it would be lent into the economy.
Oh, wait a minute. Is that a contradiction right there? Some of it would be spent into the money, but the rest of it would be lent into the economy. In other words, some of it is a debt, but it's debt-free. These people don't even make rudimentary sense, you see, and they are standing up in front of us as purported experts. What does this all mean? Let's listen to the next part.
In her model, money lent into the economy minimizes the inflationary effect of new money.
Well, now, it is lent into the economy. First, he said it isn't a debt. Now it is a debt? Oh, okay, this is just great. Let's go over that one more time. Let him finish with that part.
In her model, money lent into the economy minimizes the inflationary effect of new money.
Really? Well, this is the very question that she never answered to me. How does new money lent into the economy not eradicate inflation if it's done properly? What do you mean minimize? You mean there might be some inflation? If so, how so? If Ellen Hodgson Brown obviously knows who I am. She knows I advocate a singular solution. She knows I advocate mathematic proof of singular solution to both inflation and deflation. And now they're claiming somehow, without stating even how you would do that they're going to minimize inflation. Why would you want to minimize it even rather than solve it? And if you want to solve it, why don't you recognize the solution that already exists there? Let's go on.
The solution to all this is to return to the government-issued money of the American colonists, and particularly the colony of Pennsylvania, which had its own bank and issued government credit.
Well, now, is that even actually true? She claims that this bank was issuing government credit. Well, how would that actually even exist or transpire, that a bank would issue government credit? After all, it could issue credit to the government if it had it to give, but if it's creating this money, it's not issuing credit at all. The people that accept the money are the true creditors, because they're accepting property for no more than a promissory obligation. Again, this purported bank is simply issuing evidence of our promissory obligations to each other. So, it isn't even happening, what she says. And now, somehow, though she hasn't even explained how, this bank is not doing such a destructive thing. Well, if you actually study any of the history back at the time, there's a paper you should read, and that is, it's called A Modest Inquiry into the Nature and Necessity of a Paper Currency. It's a plagiarism, purportedly written by Benjamin Franklin. He borrowed the idea from another author of the time. But in it, he details, their idea that, in fact, when they left the idea of the gold or silver standard, that they prospered to a greater degree under a paper currency. He guesses that some amount of circulation might be too much, others too little. But he doesn't even resolve it into what is exactly right, even to preserve the integrity of the promissory obligation. These were just fledgling ideas at the time, and Ellen Hodgson Brown, in order to purport to introduce a solution to you, is claiming that these ideas were resolved and you should adopt this banking system, which didn't even exist at the time, and which she learned about from the words of Mike Montagne issued from Benjamin Franklin's mouth, and she couldn't even justify how that story was non-inflationary. All right? So, let's listen to the next part.
Congress feels that they have to bail out the banking system, and the real reason is that we think that we're dependent on this banking system for our credit, but we're not. Like Dorothy and all the characters in The Wizard of Oz, we have the power to create our own money and our own credit. The government's mentality in general seems to be, we'll do what we have to do and we'll worry about paying for it later.
Well, great. She discovered that she herself discovered, Ellen Hodgson Brown discovered, that The Wizard of Oz was written as a parody of economy somehow. And so, anyway, this bank that doesn't exist, we don't really need to rely on it, but she doesn't even give the reason why we don't need to rely on it. In other words, do we need a publisher for our promissory obligations or not? And is that the issue that it's reduced to?